Hello friends, Mr. Alper here with part B of our mini lesson on the basic parts of speech, pronouns. Just to quickly review the 8 kinds of pronouns are personal, possessive, reflexive, and intensive. Those are the ones we went over in part A. And now we will go over demonstrative, indefinite, interrogative, and relative pronouns. As with some of the first 4, a couple of these categories of pronouns actually look exactly the same. Most of the same words can fall into either category. They're just used slightly differently. And again, don't get too hung up on whether or not you understand the exact difference in terms of which category they're in. As long as you understand how they're being used, you're in pretty good shape. Demonstrative pronouns are pronouns that demonstrate, in other words, point to something. They are these 4 words and only these: this, that, these, and those. And they are used to stand in for something that you could imagine yourself, when speaking, pointing to or putting your hand on. For example, I hate this. I may simply gesture around. If somebody left a mess in my room, I would gesture at the mess and say, I hate this. Or if I pointed at a pile of books on my desk, I would say, these books, these are my books. So the word these stands for that pile that I'm pointing at. Or will you be using those? I point to whatever it is that those refers to. If one of these words, this, that, these, or those, comes right in front of a noun, it's no longer a pronoun, just like some of the other pronouns I talked about in the first lesson. If it comes in front of a noun, then it becomes an adjective. If instead of saying, will you be using those, and pointed to some binoculars, if I said, will you be using those binoculars, those is specifying which binoculars I'm referring to. If I just said, will you be using binoculars, I might just mean, are you going to use any kind of binoculars when you go out bird watching? But if I point to the ones that are lying on the table, I'm specifying those binoculars. So it goes from being a pronoun to being an adjective describing a particular one. Indefinite pronouns are kind of similar in that sometimes they can be used to stand in for the noun, but sometimes the same word could be used to replace the noun. To describe the noun. So if you use the words like some or all by themselves to represent all of those who like it hot, or all of those who are equal in the first and fourth bullet, then they are pronouns. Some like it hot, name of a really great comedy from the early 1960s, by the way. Some refers to people, those people who like it hot. It refers to jazz, by the way. Nobody and everyone are also indefinite pronouns that we never use to modify something else. They simply stand by themselves, but they're not referring to anybody in particular. So they are all indefinite pronouns. If, as the note says, though, you use the word some or all to modify another word, to narrow down the meaning of a noun that comes after it, like if you said some people like it cold, or all animals are equal, then those words become adjectives. Interrogative pronouns are pronouns that ask questions. They interrogate. To interrogate literally just means to ask a question. Of course, nowadays it means to ask a question very forcefully, to try to get evidence from somebody, but it just comes from a root word meaning to ask questions. And they include words like who, whom, whose, all those W words, and they can be understood to refer to the word, the noun, or the phrase that would answer the question. So this is a case where the antecedent doesn't appear in the sentence because it's implied. The antecedent is what you're asking about. What happened? Something happened. An accident happened. Who told you the answer? I don't know who told you the answer. That's why I'm asking. But if Amy told you the answer, then Amy would be the implied antecedent, or whoever the answer to that question is. By the way, the second and third bullet there are the examples. Make a distinction between who and whom. In case you're not clear on when to use which, don't worry about it. I will have a future lesson about it. Some of you may be able to figure out which sounds more normal, but there are lots of educated people who don't know how to use whom and often misuse it or don't use it when it is called for. It's not that big a deal, but it does make a difference in formal grammar. But for now, don't worry about the difference. Relative pronouns, for the most part, look just like the interrogative pronouns, the question pronouns. The only difference is that they're not being used to ask a question, but rather to connect or relate the noun they refer to a whole other clause, which is a clause is basically a sentence that's part of a longer sentence. So if you want to combine two sentences that refer to the same person or the same thing, you would use a relative pronoun as the connector between them. So they're kind of like conjunctions too, for those of you who remember what conjunctions are like. Relative pronouns are really pronouns that are functioning as a conjunction. In the example, the first example, say, she is a professor, she ran for mayor, you could combine those two sentences into the sentence, she is a professor who ran for mayor. Who refers back to she. Or you saw the house, Jack built the house. In the sentence that combines them, you saw the house that Jack built. That is the word that joins those two sentences, referring to the word house. That, by the way, is the one relative pronoun that isn't also an interrogative pronoun. So the relative pronouns include who, whoever, whose, whom, whomever, that, which, when, and where, as in all these sample sentences. So you can see how they're used, and if you could sort of take each of those sentences apart and see how they could be two separate sentences that refer to the same thing. Just look at the fourth one, for example, which uses the word whom. You could say, my neighbor is friendly, and I've known my neighbor for years. So both of those sentences refer to my neighbor, so I can combine them using the word whom to join them. My neighbor, whom I've known for years, is friendly. So there you have it, the 8 kinds of pronouns: personal, possessive, reflexive, intensive, demonstrative, indefinite, interrogative, and relative. If you have actually memorized or learned these well enough to be able to identify the exact kind of pronoun, good for you. But again, it's more important just for you to be able to recognize a pronoun in a sentence and understand how it's being used. So as you can see, I wanted to refer to these 4 gorgeous creatures. Rather than have to repeat nouns over and over again, I would be able to use pronouns. These are my dogs. They're the best, if I say so myself. Each is unique, and I can't imagine my life without them. Yes, those are my dogs. Looking over those 4 sentences, see if you can spot where all the pronouns are. There's one of almost each of the 8 kinds in these 4 sentences. These is a demonstrative pronoun. My is possessive. They and I are both personal pronouns. Myself is reflexive. Each is an indefinite pronoun. I is personal pronoun, and so is them, and my is a possessive pronoun. So there are a couple of kinds I didn't use. I didn't use any relative pronouns in these. But now you know all about the different kinds of pronouns. I hope you're ready for a quiz on it one of these days.